will be joining us soon. Okay, my name is Professor Sikhumbuzo Mngadi, and I teach in the Department of English. And I have met many of you who are here, except those I cannot see. And I'd like to welcome our guest, Mr. Mzi Mahola. But poets are not called by their titles. They're not called Mr. They are called Mzi. Oprah, Mongane, Serote. And nothing else formal, because poets always struggle with those questions of formality. In fact, it's in their DNA. It's the nature of their very existence to question these formal categories by which we are called and by which we are known. I'd like to welcome everyone to the first conversation after the launch of the Faculty of Humanities Centre for the Study of Race, Gender and Class. I would like to welcome again Mzi Mahola, the poet, dramatist, novelist, and many other things who has come to grace us with his presence, and also to take part in this very first conversation after the launch of the centre. I must also thank Reneka Pandey for bringing us here. In fact, if it wasn't for Reneka and the UJ Library, this may not have been possible. The work that she put into the arranging of and the organization of this event has been immense. Trying at times, but we are here now, and the fact that we are able to meet here in this very organized forum is due to her very active involvement in organizing this event and in bringing us here. And I'm not going to forget Theodora Modise, who behind the scenes has also been involved in organizing this event. Professor Camilla Naidu has been with us, myself and Reneka and Mr. Mahola, since the beginning of this arrangement. And of course, Professor Marwala is the driving force behind the idea to invite Mr. Mahola, and he will be giving a brief review of this and introducing us to Mr. Marwala as well. And I want to also welcome to this conversation our two professors, Professor Mongane Serote, Vollenhoven, and they don't need any introduction really. I mean, if I were to talk about Professor Serote's work, I would have to go back to my student days when I first read his poetry in his collection Yakhalinkomo and Behold Mama Flowers, but this is just two of the many things that I have read by Professor Serote. He's a novelist, he's an essayist, he is his work is the subject of many master's and doctoral dissertations. So it would take me the whole day, if not the whole year, or the whole life, my whole academic life really, to introduce him. And Professor Sylvia Vollenhoven, as everyone knows, is a filmmaker, has written a memoir called The Keeper of the Coombe, and has also won prizes, including one for her documentary. So it would take me a long time to introduce our professors, but what I do want to emphasize is that they are our professors that you can claim on them. And I also want to thank all those who are here with us attending this conversation. And I hope that everyone will benefit from Mr. Mahola's insights, in particular his insights on his experience in writing. Now, the housekeeping rules are that after the introduction, after Professor Marwala speaks, Mzi will speak on his work and the conditions of its production, but obviously he is welcome to speak on anything that interests him, that will also interest us. He will read after his speech, he will read from his poetry. He will read 2 poems from his poetry collection. And then I will set the scene with a few questions. I'll set the scene for the conversation with a few questions directed to Mr. Marwala, our guest today. And after the questions and answers, he will read 2 poems, again from his collection. And then Professor Mngadi Serote will speak on the subject of our conversation today, and of course on his work and experience. It's a conversation, so I cannot set any boundaries on what our professors would want to speak on. And after Professor Serote's speech, Mr. Mahola will read the last 2 poems from his collection, which will be followed by questions from the floor, if there will be any, and Professor Sylvia Vollenhoven will close the occasion with a vote of thanks and some comments. Thank you very much. So can I invite Professor Marwala to introduce us to this event?
No, thank you very much, Professor Mngadi. I also would like to acknowledge the presence of Professor Sylvia Vollenhoven, Professor Naidu, I have not seen her here, Professor Serote, and obviously Mr. Mahola. Mr. Mahola, for those of you who do not know, is actually the father of our chief financial officer, the person who makes sure that we are a viable institution from an operations perspective. Professor Serote, I started knowing Professor Serote many, many years ago when I was still in high school in 1989. Many of you who are my age will probably remember that there was a poem that was part of what we had to learn in 1989 in order for us to pass matric. Johannesburg, My Johannesburg, by Professor Serote. My teacher was Mrs. van der Merwe, my English teacher. And when I explained to Professor Serote about the explanation of that poem that was given by my teacher, Professor Serote just laughed and said, I think Mrs. van der Merwe did not get the plot. Mrs. van der Merwe is also in the audience. So thank you for joining us today. While this may not be a warm welcome on the University of Johannesburg grounds, it is certainly a warm welcome in the digital formats we have now become accustomed to meeting in. It was on Heritage Day this year that we officially launched this center, albeit virtually. There perhaps could not have been a more fitting day. As we reflect on race, class, and gender in our country, it is important that we reflect on our history and heritage, which have defined these dynamics. At the launch event, as we reflected on a rather fraught context defined by race and ethnic discrimination, gender oppressive practices, with class inequities persisting despite decades of multiculturalism and efforts to celebrate and institutionalize diversity and human rights, it was my hope that this will be the first of many admittedly painful but necessary conversations. Today, we bring this conversation back to a local context with the great Mzi Mahola. In his 1994 anthology, his poem, Ukuhlangana noHulumente, Meeting with the Government, was translated into English by Gus Ferguson. It was a somber reflection on our difficult past and a necessary reminder as we embarked on the new path as a nation. And I quote, "I remember when I was young, there were forests where people could not chop, lands where their animals could not graze. Kuba yayiyeka Hulumente," meaning because it belongs to the government. It perplexed me that this unseen man could own so much, command more respect than God, close quote. As we continue to navigate challenges around social injustices and societal inequities, this still serves as an important reminder that we must continue to have these conversations and constantly hold up the mirror to society. Now, as we shift the national conversation towards land ownership and righting of past wrongs, Mahola's words are a personification of the longevity of poetry and the power of the written word. Indeed, the pen is mightier than the sword. Could we have predicted in 1994 that this will still ring true for many of our people? Poetry rooted in our fraught history serves as our voice of conscience and heralds possible new beginnings which can turn the tide and provide us with hope again. I thank you, Ngiyabonga, Enkosi, Bayadanki.
Thank you, Professor Marwala, for those kind words and also very inspiring words as we are about to have our guest give us a brief outline of his work and his life, because his life at some point connects or intersects with his work. And my encounter with Mr. Mahola's work goes back to the 1990s, but he's better placed to talk us through his career as a writer and how he sees the present times, because some of his poetry speaks directly to our times. So there is a long trajectory, historical trajectory to his work, and I think that what I find interesting in it is that the past speaks directly to the present, in as much as the present speaks directly to the past in his work. There is that interplay and many other interplays that I would like him to give some thoughts on as I will ask my questions later. So I will give you the floor, Mr. Marwala, to give us a brief outline of your work, your writing, your experience as well over the years to the present. Thank you. Can you hear me? Looks like I've lost him.
Looks like we lost him, Prof. We may have to wait for him to log in, and maybe you can proceed with something in the meantime.
Okay, so I'm going to just speak briefly to some of the questions that I have prepared for this conversation, and Mr. Mahola has also had a chance to go through these questions and has promised to give us some thoughts on some of the issues that, or I think he's coming back, some thoughts on some of the issues that these questions bring up. Mr. Mahola, are you back?
Yeah, I'm back, Professor.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know if you heard you are here with us. Yes, I'm not sure if you heard my last words. I introduced you and then asked you to take the floor and to give us a brief outline of your work, your experience as a writer, and of course, how you see your writing developing from your earliest to your most recent works of literature.
Can I spend 1 minute saying my gratitude for this invitation, Professor?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I feel greatly honored to be invited as a guest speaker at such a prestigious and world-known institution that we represent. It is truly a great honor to have the door of this mega institution opened for me. This is something I will relish for the remaining years of my life. I'm like an eagle raised in a foul run, experiencing the freedom of the vast universe for the first time, though its eyes were always looking down where it was raised. I do not take this opportunity lightly. I truly appreciate it. You have put aside your more demanding duties and canceled your appointments and commitments in order to grace this event as if I'm bringing something worth your time. I've been asking myself, who am I to be considered as a speaker at an event like this, ahead of seasoned political figures, because I'm a writer and writers have no forked tongues. They don't know how to twist the truth. They always want to speak on record. At first, I became suspicious. I thought there was a trap somewhere, and I mulled over the idea. But when I heard, when somewhere the honorable names of our country's dignitaries, men and women of good standing, and the highest intellectual standard of our land, I stopped hesitating. Thank you for your time, your love and kindness, all of you, sirs. Now, I also like to greet our friends and invitees who decided to put aside their more important commitments in order to be with us. I thank people who gave me a lantern to light my way to the path of the writer's world. People like Robert Barold, the late Dr. Stephen Dyche, who sponsored my first 2 poetry volumes, Dr. G.B. Mona of Fortier and Dr. Linda Kwasha of NNMU for believing in me, and Mwende Ngonyama of Opera House for standing by me. I also thank my publishers for putting my name on the map, the late Mr. Gus Ferguson, UK's N Printers, Professor Mboya of Elisa Publishers, who has always been in my corner since the days when we were boxers at high school and university. I thank the teams of technicians who spent sleepless nights in order to put their event, this event together, sometimes almost coming to blows, trying to make sure that nothing goes wrong. Without your skill, special skills, guys, we wouldn't be here today. Thank you so much for your sacrifice. Now, for many years, I've been conducting creative writing workshops at our local municipal library. But there is one thing that I have never managed to do, and that is talking about my work. I didn't have time because the young people brought their work and they wanted to be listened to. I'm happy that at last I'm given this huge platform to talk and share my experiences with the audience. Meaning that my speech is going to be a selfish one. I'll be talking about my work, my writing experiences. 3 months ago, I received my manuscript of a novel from an evaluator. There was also a question at the bottom of his comments page which read, "What makes your book different from books of other revolutionary writers?" That was not an easy one to answer because I didn't know what made him ask that question. But while I answered him, I felt in me that I'd given him an adequate answer. That question is the basis of my speech today. What makes your writing different? Now, like a three-legged poet, my writing stands on 3 pillars: poetry, playwriting, and novel. I read my first novel when I was at primary school doing standard 4, now called grade 6. It was my birthday present from my late sister. It was a Western written by Zen Grey. It was titled The Young Forester. It was the first present, the first novel I had ever read. And I found it so interesting, so much that when I finished reading it, I was miserable. My sister advised me to visit a second-hand bookshop for an exchange so that I didn't have to buy books again. I took advice, and the seed of reading was planted. I wrote my first poem at school when I was doing my final year in matric. For more than 30 years, I concentrated on poetry reading and writing. Poetry writing became the first pillar in my writing. I won an award and I published 4 poetry volumes before I wrote my first drama. Now I have 5 poetry volumes plus an unpublished manuscript. I enjoy writing more than writing a novel, but people are not aware of that. I've written 5 plays. One of them won first place in a script writing competition in the Nelson Mandela Metropole. It was performed at the Barn. Another one was staged at the National Arts Festival and at the Barn. So playwriting is my second pillar in writing. Presently, I'm busy with a film script, but it refuses to come to an end. The third pillar is the novel. I published my first novel in 2016, and it received positive reviewing. I've completed its sequel, and I intend releasing it next year. It is titled The Forgotten Bastards. The collective experience gained from these 3 genres naturally gives me an unfair advantage over other revolutionary writers who did not travel the same paths. At school, I was told that a writer is someone who has a broad eye for noticing insignificant and unimportant things in life. I was told that a writer uses words to bring these things to the attention of society so that they may also give them a fresh look. I was told that a writer uses words and pictures to communicate because words on their own are not adequate. Often they are missed or misinterpreted. I'm grateful to my people for giving me character to be who I am. I'm called a writer because of their support. They gave me tools for writing. Everything I have, I took from them. They gave me a language, a culture, and stories to write about. Where I grew up, women were experts in building traditional huts. They would start with a frame and then throw huge lumps of mud on this frame, which gave it an ugly look. But it was made strong to hold the second layer of mud that was going to be added later. When they finished applying the first layer, they allowed the sun to dry it so that cracks would show. Similarly, I start my story with a frame. It may be a poem or a novel. I start with a frame and carelessly throw words onto it. When I finished with the draft, because that is what it is, I allow it to dry for a few days or a week so as to cut my emotional attachment that clouds my judgment while I'm busy writing it. When I revisit the draft or frame after that several period, I'm able to see most things or mistakes that I couldn't see before. These are the cracks that need to be filled. Similarly, the mothers will come back to apply a second layer of mud to cover the cracks and make the frame strong to withstand elements that was going to face through the coming years. After the application of the second layer, it does not mean that the heart is now livable. It does not mean that my story is ready for the public. It still needs to be edited and embellished to attract the audience because I don't write for myself. The heart needs to be painted, decorated, cleaned, and finished. Now, this is the part when writing becomes exciting. I say this is the time when the writer in me is called upon to bring my creativity. This is where our paths separate. This is where our writing differs. The three of us, the poet, the playwright, and the novelist, all in one come together. We take our time moving around the heart, reading the story, discussing it over and over, removing anything undesirable, such as cliches, redundant words, overused expressions, and tired phrases. We regard them as traps that make our story common because we often come across them in many books. They chase readers away. Readers want to hear new things. I wanted to have a picture of chicken, poultry, scratching the ground for food. They get so excited when they search for insects, corn, seeds, or whatever. Chicken are like that. They don't know what to expect. They just keep searching. The more food they discover, the longer they stay in that area. There must be something underlying to keep them scratching. There must be substance in my story to keep readers engaged. If you throw corn on a bare cement floor, arguing that you don't want your chicken to struggle, they will become bored and leave to search from loose ground. I don't want my readers to leave. I allow them to search underneath for that unknown, unexpected surprise. My writing must be different. It must have freshness in it. It must show the reader unusual things. I decorate it with beautiful, unusual colors, such as new and rare figurative language, imagery, and capturing expressions. I look at nature and observe its behavior to see if I can find any language of speech, any figure of speech. Now let's look at the behavior of the little chap called the chameleon and see how he survives. Now this is what I say about the chameleon. The secret of a chameleon is not to change the environment. but these colors to suit the situation. I'll repeat, the secret of a chameleon is not to change the environment, but these colors to suit the situation. My story must stimulate or inspire the reader's world of senses, and that is why I make use of images. My poem must not tell, it must show. Again, let's look at the old-timer, the tortoise. It takes gentle strokes to motivate a tortoise that has withdrawn into its shell. It takes gentle strokes to motivate a tortoise that has withdrawn into its shell. These animals are not from space. Everybody knows about them. Now let us look at domestic animals like sheep and goats. Who can tell if a goat sweats when the skin always hides the fact? Who can tell if a goat sweats when the skin always hides the facts? These are fresh figures of speech. No one has used them. If they had been used, then they must still be fresh. They are not cliches or exhausted. I can also use them. I use them to attract the attention of the reader and to remind her of our affinity with nature. I use them as spice on the stew that I'm preparing, but I use them appropriately. I was told that I'm an inspirational writer, meaning that I must exercise my insight to bring to society's attention something new, or to remind them of something that they have forgotten, ignored, or dismissed as of no significance. This means that a writer must bring to people's attention something vital which they have not been paying attention to. Since you're a writer, you can only achieve this mammoth task with the use of delicate and narrative tools, words. With words, you must draw pictures and images. Your words, your poems must not tell, they must show with pictures. Maybe you are asking yourself, if a poem tells, does it mean it is useless? My answer to that question is no. It is not worthless. It is poor. It is wordy. It is abstract, talky, dull, and literal. It's a poor poem. They say what they say, or what it says. There is no underlying meaning. It is poor, but it is a poem. Now let's look at the following poem taken from When Rains Come. He came down the street, as it titled. He came down the street, in one hand holding a live chicken by its legs, in the other a pot of onions and potatoes. I'll repeat it. He came down the street, in one hand holding a live chicken by its legs, in the other a pot of onions and potatoes. That's a complete poem. Now this poem serves as a window for other societies to peep through and see how Black people live in Africa. The language serves as that bridge for cultural cross-pollination. Very few white people have been to our marketplaces and observed how imileqwa are handled. We carry them by their legs while water is boiling at home and someone is ready with an axe to chop away the head. You don't see such pictures in the suburbs. The creative writer in me must transport our culture to the reader's doorsteps. My pleasure is fulfilled when I bring something new to readers. I want to enjoy in my privacy the feeling of creating unknown phrases. It is the use of fresh figurative language or idioms that enhance and embellish or decorate my story or poem. It is not the amount of mud I throw at the heart that makes it beautiful heart, but the choice of material I use for the finishing touches. When all has been said and done, I will put the manuscript away and forget about it for more than a year. I will not allow excitement to rush me to the publishers. During that period, some very important information will come up, which will force me to make a vital change in the story. Possibly that could be something which I would never have corrected if I had submitted the manuscript prematurely. It will be something that will make me miserable every time I look at this book, but too late to correct it. When Professor Naidu told me that I would be expected to read from strange things, I immediately felt uneasy. I felt uneasy not because I'm ashamed of the things that I said 45 years ago. No, strange things is my first point. This title does not embarrass me. I have a special attachment to this book, and I still stand by what I said 45 years ago. But I've grown and have matured, and that is what I would like the world to know, that I'm not locked in the past. I want the world to know that an inevitable change affects everyone, even writers. Yes, it is true that the present generation punishes previous generations for things that they said or prophesied during their time, were lifted and placed on pedestals and stripped so that the world may see who we are. For the first time in my life, I find myself called onto a different platform to come and account to the doyen of literature for things that I have been saying in the last 45 years. Yes, that is the unfortunate life of writers, because they don't write for themselves, they write for the people. I was taught that a writer's duty is to be a mouthpiece for the voiceless. I was told that a writer's mission is to remind those in power who cannot speak, those in power who cannot hear from their high positions if they've got ears, that it is tough and hot down here. I also learned that I also learned that I'm sorry, guys. I also learned that it is tough. I'm sorry. I also learned that a writer's duty is to write for those who cannot write and tell their stories so that the world may know what happened. I apologize for that. Now, the poems that I'm going to read are a mixture from strange things in subsequent volumes. I should have done that first, but I forgot to. Change is like a river in flood. When it frolics and tumbles down its drive, it uproots and takes along everything in its way. My first poem shows how traumatic change can be. This poem has been prescribed nationally for the grade 12 learners doing file. It's taken from the last chapter and it's titled Everything Has Changed. And I would love if the audience would ask me about this poem because it is very special in my life. Everything has changed. Everything has changed except graves. I stood at the ruins of my former school, where I was patiently molded. Wild plants own every space now. My soul was paralyzed. What happened to the roofs, the doors and windows? Can these damp, lonely walls still recognize me. Everything has changed. The ground where we ran and laughed, and the corner of the playground where I pummeled a schoolmate almost to pulp. Scarfed with water to conceal my shame. A short distance away stands a renovated church, a Dutch reformed formerly. Now a Methodist, embraced by mute little symmetry that claims the past. The dividing fence has vanished, though growth strangles it to near extinction. Called names of the pallet whites are asked. Called names of the pallet whites who were part of this community and made monumental contributions are etched on the headstones. Sometimes whites come here to clean and put flowers on their family graves. A voice whispers next to me, but I do not recognize his face because everything in Latchton has changed except graves. I'm going to read the second poem now. There are many untold stories, heroic stories of individuals who risked their lives for the sake of their people and who were to become forgotten bastards after the dust had settled. The long poem narrates one of my narrow escapes from the state security forces. It is unpublished. It is titled "They Didn't Stop the Train." In Tabanshu, the train came to a stop and my heart doubled its rhythm. I looked through the window and saw them. There were 7 of them, 6 guys and a woman, standing under the gum trees. I got up and reached for my cooler bag in the luggage rack. I knew what they were. They could not fool me. I put it back on the bunk and took out a chicken portion, put the bag back in the rack, and started nibbling to frustrate my apprehension. The train was stationary, the agents making no move, and my heart rioting. When the whistle sounded and the train began to move, all 7 rushed to my coach as if trained for the Olympics. Once inside, they split into 2 groups. 3 rushed to seal the north exit, and 4 remained standing, chatting a few meters from me. I continued nibbling. The 3 in the north were searching passengers and their luggage with the skill of bloodhounds. Was it not possible that could be forgotten? I kept comforting myself, though the net was getting tighter. As the guys doing the search were coming closer, praying made me feel as if I was crying in thunder. When the team finished sniffing, all 7 came and conversed on me. Your passport, can we look at it? I stood up to give them false respect, hoping it would mitigate my case. The guy holding my document read my details out loud and again yelled, "Where do you come from? Who do you stay there? Do you stay there? Who are you visiting? For how long did you stay? Would like to search your bag." I took the bag down and placed it on the bunk, once more muttering a silent prayer. "Let your will be done, Jesus. This is beyond me." The bag had a false bottom where some of the ANC and Communist Party documents were hidden. Wasn't that what they were after? They took them out and shared them among themselves. I was more than 1,000 kilometers from home, where no one knew where on earth I was. I thought of those whose bones were never seen and concluded that likewise man would also not decorate any part of our country. They replaced the documents and asked again, pointing at the cooler bag, "What have you got there? Bring it down so that we may look." I placed the cooler bag on the bank and unzipped it, uninvited. I lost my keys. I've lost my keys. I concluded. The agents craned their necks and peered over my vitals to fulfill their curiosity. Without touching the cooler bag, bulging with evidence, the 7 agents filed away from me, dragging their disappointed feet. Like a discarded scarecrow, I remained standing, waiting for their order. Come with us. Your journey has come to an end, unaware that a heavenly agent had deleted the vital information. Not. Professor Mngadi, should I continue? Okay.
Sorry, I had muted myself. Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation and the reading. In fact, you have preempted many of the questions that I had planned to ask, and you've addressed virtually all of them. But I am going to ask a couple. I'm not going to ask all of them now, because I think many of the things that you spoke about speak directly to virtually all the questions that I had prepared. So I'm going to ask a couple of them. I just want to go back to what you said earlier about that you don't release a manuscript to the publishers until you are satisfied that it represents your artistic vision. You have written poetry, you have written fiction, you have written drama, and you are now busy with a film script, which means that your work really covers all the forms, poetry, fiction, drama, now film. Would you say that there's an artistic vision, a single or maybe many artistic visions that inform your work? If, say, for example, you believe that you must be satisfied that your work represents your artistic vision, would you say that there is an artistic vision that your work either collectively or individually represent?
Definitely, Professor Mngadi. In my childhood, when I looked and observed these mothers building these huts, that picture stuck into me. And surprisingly, it was retrieved when I was, later on, when I was writing poetry or even maybe drama. Because you need to have a frame. And to me, the frame was what I saw in the areas when the mothers were building these huts. They were started with a frame. So now my stories all start with a frame. Is that not art in itself? Because I use it as a pen, I use words now to give you the pictures. But what must I present? I must present a lasting picture, which is an image now. As I said, that words on their own tend to be missed, or misunderstood or misinterpreted. But if you give your reader a concrete picture, like these poems that I have read, those pictures stick forever. They cannot be misinterpreted. But then you have got to be artistic again, because you are bringing now something concrete to describe something abstract. So you've got to be very appropriate so that there is no confusion, and there cannot be any confusion because we all know that, and these animals that we are familiar with. I don't bring animals from Mars. I have to go to confuse the reader. The reader is introduced now to this animal, but the animal maybe it was always just looked, and taken for granted. But when now you present this animal in a different way, then the reader is going to be able to look at it in a fresh way and say, oh, how did you see this? And I didn't know. And that is the picture that is going to last now in the reader's mind. And I think, to me, that is a very artistic. It's not something that I work hard to achieve. I just spread nature in front of me because I worked at the museum with marine life, that is every animal at sea, with terrestrial animals. I know their behavior. So it's easy to just look at it, bring one that is going to fit or describe or show what you want to show to the reader. So they're always at my disposal. Nature is always around me. And apart from the fact that I grew up on a farm, so I'm very much attached. And you notice that none of my poems or images are westernized. No, they are all natural, Africanized. Thank you, Professor.
Yes, thank you very much. And you've also addressed what was going to be my next question, which is that your work maintains a strong focus on the everyday, on the ordinary. In fact, going back to your earlier poems, right down to the most recent, your work is very carefully organized around certain exchanges, which is the exchange between the past and the present, between hope and despair, and so on. And all of these are grounded in the ordinary, in the day-to-day. And it reminds me of the work of Njabulo Ndebele in the early 1990s, where he called for this artistic attention to the ordinary, from writers whom he believed were no longer interested in well, the purpose of art, which is to elevate that which is known to the status of art, of deep contemplation, if we want to call art by that term. But let me, well, you have addressed this issue, and you address it in your poetry, and you've also addressed it in your presentation. Now, my next question is about language. You've written your work in English. And you spoke in our conversation a few days ago. You spoke about hosting the Kenyan writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o and arguing about language, the language of African literature, and Ngugi's position is very well known, that his view is that African writers must return to their indigenous languages. And you said to me, you disagreed with him, and that you continue to write in English out of choice, not of obligation. Can you give us some thoughts on that question?
Firstly, I didn't tell you that I am very good in the course. I've always been good since I was young, because I grew up in an area. I was always the top student in this course until I finished school. I have translated 6 books from English to this course for DPMSA, that is Dairy Prince Ministries, South Africa. I translated my own work, a collection of my best poems, into this course. I conducted creative writing workshops for schools under the auspices of NNMU, Nelson Mandela University. And I conducted a workshop for schools here, for teachers actually, here in PE. And we had this program because I felt that the teachers needed to be motivated and to understand that they have got a tool, that is language, to inspire the children in class with creative writing. So, and that was a very successful project. It was called Isithatha Literature Program. But unfortunately, we didn't get any support after the launch of it. And then here at the Zulu Library, local municipal library, for 14 years, I conducted creative writing workshops for the youth. And I was using Xhosa in English. But now when you ask me whether I write only in English, I'll say, yes, I write English. Because Xhosa is a regional language. If I don't have an urgent message or something big or a vision, then I can write Xhosa. I know that maybe 10 people will read Xhosa. 12 people don't read Xhosa anymore. Maybe 10 will read that. But if I write in English, then it means that I've got a very wide readership internationally. So I have got this vision that I need to share my experiences with the world community. I do not believe that writing Xhosa are promoting my language, because my language is being killed. Another writer from Eastern Cape, CC, I've forgotten her name. Once said at the Grahamstown Festival, Xhosa is a language of poverty. I stood up and I realized I didn't expect that from her. Not that she said something wrong, but her courage to say these things. Because there are many writers here in Cape whose books are not read. One of them is my friend. He's a former inspector of schools. He has written 6 books, but he has not been read. Nobody reads Xhosa anymore. Now, what's going to encourage me to write Xhosa when I know that there won't be any person to read my books? So Nguki, on the other side, first wrote in English, and then when he became famous, because otherwise I wouldn't have read his books if he were writing in Kikuyu. He wrote in English. Then I bought 2 of his books. The first one is Grain of Wheat, Youth No Child. But I wouldn't have heard about these books if Nguki had written in his own language, Kikuyu. But now he dares to condemn on me for writing in my own language. Instead of giving a chance to write and then it be known, and then like him after that, I write and write in my mother tongue. So for these reasons, I do not support, I don't agree with him. Now, where is he? He's in New York. It's unlikely that he's writing in the Kikuyu in New York. He's writing in English. It was really unfair, you know.
And his works in Kikuyu have been translated into English in any case. So the debate is very complex, and one can really stand on one side. And I think that your position is very interesting in that you are as interested in writing in English as you are in translation and in writing in Xhosa as well. And I think if one limits the argument to one side, as Ngugi does quite often, it may not be a productive discussion. So I'm going to end my questions here, because out of the 5 that I had prepared, you have addressed virtually all of them both in your presentation and in the answers that you have given. I would like to move straight to, if Prof. Serote is ready, I would like to move straight to Prof. Serote so that we are able to make the time to give his thoughts on this occasion. As Prof. Serote
Mzi.
Yeah,
Professor.
Hey, you, man. Hey.
Okay.
Now, first of all, you start us by telling us that an eagle grows in a cage.
Yes.
And then we have to sit here and imagine, good Lord, what is it going to do now? Because that's not its field. As we are contemplating this, wondering at the cruelty of the human species to other species, they then tell us that, no, the eagle flew away, was allowed to fly, but as it was flying, it was looking at the cage also, contemplating the cage. Now, I got stuck with that image because it's an image which talks to many, many issues. First of all, we're in a center which was recently established, talking about race, gender, and class, all of them cages. All of them cages. And of course, when one listens to your work, one is asked to be very skillful in understanding contradictions of life. A township boy has to imagine how women in the village build a house by throwing mud at its frame. One questions strength, one questions skill, one questions the strength of the house, the skill with which it was created, knowing that most times, even now, if I go to the villages, I still see mud houses, which means there is strength in them. They've withstood the test of time, as people would say. So there are all these things which you say through your work, but which you also amplify when you talk to them. And I must say to you that as I was listening, I was thinking, really, this is what writing must be. It must take many things that we take for granted, amplify them so that we look through them, into them, and for them, so that we're consistently walking along a long mirror that consistently reflects us, asking us, are you aware who you are? Do you know who you are? This is what you are doing, you see, throughout as you are writing. I am almost familiar with villages, almost, not really. I know the township very well. And now when I see that here's a man trapped in a train, you see, there are no trains in Alexandra, you see. So trains are foreign to me. A man is trapped in a train and he uses his umpago in English.
Provision.
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 He uses provision as a shield. And I thought at one point you were going to say, actually, eventually we shared the shield because we took cover under the shield ourselves. What am I saying? I'm saying that you've mastered the skill of exposing antagonistic contradictions of life. You expose them. I mean, a township boy has to sit here and listen to you say, you can caress, I don't know if that is, I'm using the word, the same word, a tortoise, you see. And I'm thinking, where do you caress it? But of course, after I followed your presentation and have accepted this person comes from the village, the rural area, the original space of the human species, the original space of life. And this person is picking up all the images from there and saying to us, here is still a mirror that you have to look once and all into it and ask yourself questions. And we do that as you tell us, whether you tell us about the house, whether you tell us about the tortoise. Now, I have also imagined this man who comes with holding a chicken with his legs, you see. I'm almost breathing like a chicken now, you know, because now, you see, the thing is, the mind sticks to that, you know, because you mentioned it, and it's something which the mind says, really, why is it like that? And it sticks to that. But also, at the same time, we walk with a man and his potatoes, you know. And you wonder where the journey is going to end with all of these things, because it's no longer just the chickens, it's no longer just the potatoes, it's not longer just the man. It's a whole series of life matters which are playing around, you see, which we have to deal with. And then, of course, the tragedy that you spoke about towards the end. You and I know that when language disappears, it's a whole culture. It's a whole life of a people. It's a whole resolution of all kinds of issues which faced a people who spoke that language. And on the one hand, you are saying, I speak it, I use it, but on the other hand, you are also saying, I've accepted that it will disappear. What a tragedy, not yours, not of your making, but what a tragedy. I'll tell you a story, Mzi. Once, when we were working in Parliament, and we were working on the question of language, and we're creating this thing called Pan South African Language Board. We came to a meeting in one of the villages in Eastern Cape, and talking about language, of course, using when we came out of the discussions, a journalist came to me and said to me, I need an interview because of the things that you were saying there in the hall. And I said, no problem. And he said to me, can we conduct the interview in isiXhosa? Now, coming from Alexandra, which we always say Alexandra was good because we speak all the African languages. I said, oh no, there's no problem. Let's conduct the interview in isiXhosa. The first sentence which this person said, I did not know what he meant. And I had to signal him to stop the interview and stop the recording. So I was in serious trouble when he did, and we conducted in English, the interview in English. What am I saying? Two things happened in that thing. Of course, in Alexandra, we spoke a certain version of isiXhosa. But when you really sit and speak to Xhosa speakers, you can sense the depth of the language. You can sense the depth of its imageries. You can sense the depth of the experience of its people. And that is what makes it an extremely complex language, because it had to deal with extremely complex matters of history, of heritage, of legacies, of culture. And this is what African languages are about. In our country, there are 9 of them. They are like that, almost all of them. Now, I go to the contradiction that you speak about, you see. You, the master of contradictions. That you do use it, you do know it very well. Of course, having grown among the elders there, you must know it. There's no choice about it. And you must have fathomed its depth, you know. You are still there in Eastern Cape even now. And you say, I translate it, I use it, I do this with it, and all of that. And then after that, you say, I have accepted that it will die. Because I know that its speakers have accepted that it will die. And I also know that they've come not to use it or read it. Which means what you've done is you've left this tragedy in our hands. Asking us without asking the question, which is another of your skills, to say, well, ponder over this matter and live in the world. And when you leave us like that, what you are really also saying is unlearn what all of those languages have learned, but use the culture that they gave you to live in this new culture that you have to live in. You enter the English language. Now, I think it was Chinua Achebe who, when they debated with Ngugi, convinced me, like you are convincing me, that if the nuances of those languages remain with us and are in our DNA, then even as we have to write in English, we will not be contradicting the diversity of human life. The clearest example, if we want to learn, is if you listen to people who come from the Caribbean islands, Africans who come from the Caribbean islands, who speak French, who speak English, who speak Spanish, which is totally different from Spanish of Spain. This is the perhaps my consolation to say, because you see, if you value diversity as the wealth of the human experience and wealth of human life, wealth of life itself, because this is what nature consistently displays to us. It displays the harmony and the cohesion of diversity within itself consistently. And because we are part of this nature, we have to live that experience also and consistently display its beauty and its challenges, this diversity. Now, those of us who are on the African continent have to come to terms with the fact that that diversity which we so value, which we have so engaged, I mean, all you need to see is how we use color on the continent. Everywhere where you travel on the continent, you will never miss the diversity of culture, but also how skillfully it is used on the continent. And therefore, you experience the beauty of beauties of the continent itself in the use of color. So if you do translations, I do not think that it would be only the translations of the words, but it will be going into the depth of the English word to transform it, to deal with the diversity of your own experience. The experience of a chicken held by its legs. And the experience of how you talk to the tortoise to take out its head and talk to you, as you also contemplate how an eagle, which was caged, looks at the cage as it flies and remembers where it was, and therefore also remembers. As it does that, I'm sure it must remember as it is flying in the sky. It must really fathom the understanding of who it is. So I thank you very much for that, Mzi, for taking us, that I feel comfortable in calling you Mzi, even in this context, because of the journey that you gave us. I'm very much thankful of it. Please keep it intact. There's no doubt that that skill of traversing, of engaging, of penetrating into contradictions and revealing them, that skill is a skill of building wisdoms. Thank you very much, Prof. Sikhumbuzo. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Professor Serote, for those words. And I think that what you've said captures many of the questions that that Mzi's work touches on. And I think that when one looks at, well, at least at the work that you sent to me, I do find that there's a strong communal spirit that informs this work. In fact, your most recent poetry, which speaks directly to the violence against women and the vulnerability of young people, raises the most urgent issue of where we are as not just a small community in the Eastern Cape or in KwaZulu-Natal, but as a society that has, well, gone through these these moments of violence. And I think that what you speak to in your early poetry and your recent poetry is this thread of communal breakdown, even when we are supposed to be re-engineering outside of the apartheid social engineering of the time before the time where we are now. We are supposed to be engineering a very different society and a very different attitude. The attitude that we spoke about, for example, in the 1970s, in the time of the Black consciousness, an attitude that seems to me to not have found firm ground in our societies today. And I think that your poetry and Professor Serote's summary of some of the ideas that you have raised in your presentation speaks to that, in my view, to that void, to that lacuna, which seems to me to remain perhaps the driving force behind the violence that we see today, that we have not really lived up to the hopes and of course up to well, our own creativity going back to the 1970s. And I always make reference to the 1970s because the 1970s were a time when we could imagine a community, we could imagine a sense of healing and of course of a future where we would be. But it seems to me that we are still struggling with this interplay between the past and the present, between hope and despair, which is to some extent the very nature of creativity and of the creative act. But when we look at art and life, as always in a relationship of tension, it seems to me that life is losing out because there seems to be a fundamental contradiction in the way in which our lives are moving seemingly towards something that doesn't look like the future that that our literature, our history, our politics anticipated. It seems to me that the social space has been emptied out of its significance. And I think that this also speaks, what Professor Serote spoke about also speaks to the questions that have been asked by Professor Vollenhoven and Mzi Mahola. Professor Vollenhoven asked the question, what are your thoughts about the special place African storytelling occupies in the world? And Mzi Mahola asked, does Mr. Mahola think he will one day write in isiXhosa, his mother tongue? In other words, does language shape the way in which we imagine ourselves, imagine our societies? And I know that you have spoken about language and self, language and identity, and language and place, language and community. Could you perhaps very briefly outline some of your thoughts on that question of language, on the question of storytelling, for example, and the way in which African storytelling occupies, or the place that African storytelling occupies in the world, and indeed the question of language broadly. And I think that this question has come back again and again. And what would your vision of African languages be in terms not of the language as such, but in terms of its very nature as, you know, the way in which we imagine ourselves, the way in which we imagine the world, the way in which language is at the center of the ways in which we tell stories about ourselves and about where we are going.
Yeah, it is very unfortunate that the TV focuses on violence. If there is a story that said to be good, it means that this story is violent. But there is no story that educates the youth to the element of forgiving. because the spirit of unforgiving is very dangerous. Now, if we teach our children to forgive, then they will escape the traps that will follow later on in life. Because it is not easy for a person to discover on his own or her own the danger of not forgiving. One time I was in Athens when I told my sentiment that how much I wish I could come across those guys who tortured me when I was younger, who took my manuscript. I said, I wish I could meet with them because now I'm mature now, and then show them my love because we are fellow South Africans. And I have grown to know the value of forgiving. Now the whole hall stood up and they gave me a standing ovation. I couldn't continue with my reading. And then they came and to add one by one that let me tell you the value of forgiving. Let me tell you, those are Greek guys. Let me tell you the value. Now, later on, when I followed this up, I found that many people become sick because they do not forgive. There are certain sicknesses that are associated with unforgiving, right? Now, let's come to the language issue. If those in power who could, again, reverse what the apartheid government did, focusing now on literature, because we became writers because we were focused, we were forced to have read 7 unprescribed books for isiXhosa, for a mark to pass a JC. So the culture of reading was very much enforced then. But now, if you go to schools, teachers, they run away. They don't want to be associated with you if you're going to do poetry. One school even asked my sister to come and represent me because she is related to me. She will know why I wrote this poem instead of allowing me to come and teach the children the poem. So there is that kind of attitude. Our generation are not interested or are not made to be interested in literature. Now we expect them to write good stories, but where do they find them? And then if now we will start having reading classes, they don't have time for that because the time they need is to attend soapies or to watch soapies at home. So you sometimes would tend to lose hope. And then the very few that you get for in these workshops, you don't see them often. They only come to work. Once they are working in writing, they've achieved something. And find that the writing that we have is conventional. It doesn't appeal to them. And I'm disqualified. I cannot do what is called, don't know, hip hop or rap, whatever. It's out of my scope. So I'll come now with this thing that they do not enjoy or like, yeah, but they want workshops, but only 1 or 2 will stick, and through your encouragement, he will develop because they are quite a number that have, because 14 years of active teaching them is very long and they have achieved a lot. So I think there are 2 things. As you first have to workshop the teachers and they become easily motivated. We spent almost a whole year doing these workshops together. 2 from each school, 2 from each school. And then I saw how beautiful these things are. And they were so encouraged and they became writing. And then if now you encourage them to be motivated or motivate them, encourage them to realize their potential, because once we have good language, it means that we have good tool, it means that you can use that tool for creative gift. Now they go back and share that thing with their learners. Now I was running this workshop for the NMU, reading schools to untap talent, and they were very beautiful because we had results. But again, this will never last. So somehow we need to focus on what is going to untap because not everyone is going to be a writer, but that those who have got this talent, so we need to encourage them.
Okay, thank you very much. We are approaching the end of this occasion, and I am going to ask Professor Sylvia Vollenhoven to give us some thoughts and conclude the event. Thank you, Professor. Over to you.
Kite says, kite says, kite says. Last night, I dreamed that I'm called upon to meet a great, or to greet rather, a great man. And in the dream, I worry that I don't have the appropriate words, the language for this important meeting. But anyway, I bow down, and as I do bow down, the words come to me. I greet this man in my dream in the name of the people of my mother, the Khoikhoi and the Sun, in the name of the people of my father, descended from the slaves of the East, and in the name of our common ancestors. Kite says, Mzi Mahola, I thank you in the name of those who have gone before. May you walk in the future. May you walk to the future in the footprints of our ancestors. Kite says, salam. UJ Centre for the Study of Race, Gender and Class, and as Professor Serote says, boxes, all of them, aims to create a space though for stimulating debate and interdisciplinary scholarship that truly leads the way. Within this context, Mzi Mahola's poetry, his writing, his artistry is a beacon, a shining light on who we really are, shining a light on who we really are. Immersing myself in your concise writing, your writing is like coiled springs of pure power. I am transported from the tangible grief that tugs at my throat in What Will They Eat? To a moment in history perfectly captured in Ukuhlangana no Hulumente. And then there's the wry humor in Impassable Bridge, or that eloquent brevity that is like a haiku in He Came Down the Street. And I really loved listening to you do that. And of course, the epic nostalgia and yearning for something intangible, unreachable in the poem about Hogsback Mountains or Ibukazana. This is work that takes us to another place. So Gangans, thank you for transporting us, Gangans. Thank you for taking us to the important places deep inside ourselves. In this time of searching for a new vision for the future, your writing takes us into the depths of our humanity, where all the answers can be found to the dilemmas of our time. Kai Gangans, thank you so much for being an inspiration, for being the chameleon that suits the colors of our times. Siyabonga. We look forward to that film script that refuses to come to an end. As a writer, what I will take with me from today, apart from all the other things, is that it is not the amount of mud I throw that makes the hut, it is the finishing touches. I really like that. Thank you also to Professor Mongane Serote for his in-depth response and reflections, especially around language. Thank you to the Vice Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg, Professor Tshilidzi Marwala, and Professor Sikhumbuzo Mngadi of the Department of International Relations. Thank you to the Dean of Humanities, Professor Kamala Naidu, and everyone at the University of Johannesburg responsible for arranging this inspiring event. Kaitse kure, bye for now, go well. Kaitse kure, salane kakushle, kaitse kure.
Thank you very much, Prof. And I hope that there's a book coming soon or something coming soon after we go back to campus, because with those words, surely there must be something you are putting down on paper. It can't be that you are just thinking about these words now.
Professor Mngadi, Professor. The manuscript is finished, but it needs blib.
Yes, and Prof. Vollenhoven has something, because I was saying to her that if she can speak these words on the spot, then there must be something coming through as soon after we go back to campus. And your script. And
Can I
your
send
script,
you enjoy it?
yes, your script should
Yes.
also be on its way. Don't
Yes.
be too particular about your first venture into film writing. You must put it out there so that we can begin to see a filmmaker in the making somewhere deep in that.
I was talking about it. I was talking about it, the novel, the sequel, because that novel has got a gripping title, "The Forgotten Bastards." You will enjoy
yes,
it.
yes. And who are those?
I need a blame.
You need, well, we can do something about it.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yes, we can do something about it. And I think that this was a really wonderful event. And I must again thank the library, Reneka Pandey, for giving us a wonderful occasion. And I also want to thank those of our students who have attended, and I can see the comments on the sidebar from some of the names that I recognized. Luleko, who says that this is an inspiring talk and wants us to reflect further on the idea of languages, and of course the idea of language and death. Do language really die, or do they get reinvented in other forms and in other places? But I think that from the looks of things, you have presented a really provocative talk about, you know, what we should be thinking about today, about writing, about who we are, about the present, about the future, and about, you know, the centrality of language in all of these questions. And I think that, you know, students should take these provocative questions forward and investigate in their own researches some of these questions that have been raised today. Thank you, Professor Serote, for raising very pertinent questions, especially as we grapple with issues of the present and how the past must speak to the present, and indeed how the present must speak to the past in meaningful ways, not just in a conversation that leaves us without any profound questions to ask further, and also answers that we can propose for those questions. And I also want to thank Professor Camilla Naidu for her inspiring leadership. This Center for the Study of Gender, Race, and Class would not have been where it is now. It wouldn't, in fact, have taken off without her persistent interest in its value, but also in its future. So always taking forward as really inspiring, but also very important ideas of our time. Because I remember once a colleague of mine asking, you know, why do we not have apartheid studies? We can conceive of many ways in which we can look at our past, we can look at our present, and of course the persistence of apartheid in our present. And I think that this center addresses what, in my view, has been a burning question, not just you know, on the minds of the academics, but on the minds of everyone who is interested in the future of this country. So thank you very much to everyone and to our students for the wonderful occasion that we've had. Thank you again, Mzi, for the wonderful presentation. And I hope that you will, when we do go back to campus, come and give a talk to our students, and hopefully to you know, to our colleagues as well. Thank you.
I don't have ways to thank you, really, guys. Thank you, that's all I can say. I'm fulfilled now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know if there's anyone who wants to say something. Prof. Camilla?
Yes, no, thank you, everyone. This was a wonderful event. And we look forward to further engagements and discussions. Thanks to all. And we shall see you again at our next event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kafila, for giving us this platform. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.